Thanks for inviting me to speak this morning. My presentation, really, I see it as a scene setter that focuses on the meaning and importance of pride and place. One of the things, really, that connects what Nell's been saying about the physicality of the built heritage with how we interpret it, how we take joy from it, and how we take pride in it. I'll be asking how changes to town centres impact on this feeling of pride of place in where we live and work. And assuming it matters to you, I'll be offering some tips on what you can do to help boost local pride in place. I love this cheeky and challenging approach from the people behind Stop in Stockport. Here they use an image of Stockport's Victorian Market Hall to counter the throwaway remark used to sum up too many of our town and city centres. This emphasis that they place on community engagement, you'll see is a key theme for what I'll be saying to you this morning. I'll be talking about boosting pride and place from the perspective of the holistic approach that we at the People and Places Partnership take to revitalising town centres. It's an approach that focuses on what we call the what and the how of town centre revitalisation. This is a way of working with a strong focus on community engagement to bring partners with you on that revitalisation journey. And as Nell has said, it's an approach that's been adopted nationally by the Local Government Association. Don't do it now, though you can learn more about the approach by scanning the QR code in the header. That's when you receive the video version of this presentation. To some, though, pride in place is just the latest version of the Emperor's new clothes. Pride in place was used prominently in a policy context as recently as July 2021, when the then Prime Minister delivered a key speech on levelling up. So in terms of a policy context, although it's a phrase we're familiar with, its use in terms of government policy is fairly recent. Academic papers, like the comprehensive one by the Bennett Institute, based in Cambridge, grapple with trying to define pride in place, in the hope that if we can measure it, we can go about targeting how we boost it. That said, the government's own level up guidance largely acknowledges that a great deal of progress needs to be made in creating methods for how we can measure pride in place. Critics say pride in place is an ephemeral concept that is hard to pin down and doesn't directly impact on people's economic and social being, like, say, transport or digital connectivity. And if, as we said, it cannot be reliably managed, how can you reliably and accurately report on progress? Well, the shrewd politician, though, gets it that if people feel better about the places where they live and work, they may well end up feeling better about you and your work. Places are perceived differently by different people. This chart from the government's 2021 Community Life Survey emphasises that there are also different phrases synonymous with pride and place, or how people feel about where they live and work. In this case, the phrase they use is neighbourhood belonging. It's also something that is interpreted differently by different people. And as this slide shows, in terms of neighbourhood belonging, at least, which is perhaps synonymous in part with pride and place, it also indicates sentiments. Such sentiments are not felt or expressed evenly across the population. Although it's increased in recent years, 16 to 24-year-olds, for example, consistently feel a lower sense of commitment to where they live than all age groups over 34. So something to bear in mind when you're speaking to different audiences, their commitment to perhaps some of the things that you're doing will be intrinsically different. What is consistent, though, is there seems to be a special relationship between the vitality of our high streets, our town centres, and people's pride in the wider town. This statistic used in the Bennett report is consistent with research cited by the government that we have written about recently in a blog. Specifically, analysis of local area satisfaction conducted by Demos concluded that local shops are valued for a variety of reasons beyond just fulfilling people's own retail needs, and are treated as a kind of proxy for the overall socio-economic health of a place. The presence of grocery retail and independent shops is particularly valued, according to the research. At People and Places, we've long included measures of stakeholders' perceptions of place to help understand issues and monitor progress. Here, I present 4 word clouds of key sentiments that customers have used to describe 4 neighbouring Hertfordshire towns where we are currently working. An in-touch local resident or a politician could readily tell you which word cloud represents which town. If we went to resurvey the towns in 2 years' time, after some interventions and investment in enhancing them, it will be informative to track those changing sentiments between the towns. Don't, though, if you do such tracking, be surprised if sentiment sometimes lags behind the physical changes that you're responsible for. When we did such survey work after major enhancements of Carnarvon's town centre, we found a lag before the improvements on the ground converted to improved sentiments. Businesses in particular were still mindful of what they perceived as months of disruption. The key takeaway from this is that even a partial focus on tracking sentiments will help you understand the wider role of your work and how it is registering, hopefully, with your stakeholders. Turning specifically to the role of the built heritage in creating pride and place in the town centre, the available evidence indicates it has an important role. The Bennett report says this is the reason why many local authorities have become actively engaged in heritage-led regeneration schemes. As Nell indicated, using historic assets to bring social and economic benefit, as well as addressing questions of identity and morale in local communities. When we looked at good practice in putting together plans under the government's Shared Prosperity Fund, we placed a strong evidence on developing proposals from place-based evidence of need with locally agreed solutions developed through engagement. Gauging stakeholders' perceptions and priorities about the importance of a town's built heritage is important within this. The photo used here to illustrate this guidance is of Tadcaster in North Yorkshire, where we've worked recently, which has a particular set of circumstances that mean that the state of its built heritage has a huge impact on people's pride and place, and correspondingly, the ability to intervene and to boost that pride and place. If you are interested in boosting pride and place, or whatever synonym you choose to use to describe people's positive perceptions of a town, you cannot restore buildings in isolation of other changes or wider communication of progress. This slide quotes the Bennett report again and references Letchworth Garden City, where we are currently engaged in preparing a revitalisation plan for the town centre. Letchworth is one of those places where perceptions are less than the reality of the place. This is partly because the century-old Garden City ethos that set it apart is no longer fully appreciated by the people that live and work in the town. The Letchworth Garden City Heritage Foundation understand the importance of wider outreach to add to a revitalisation approach that reasserts and potentially updates the town's unique origins as the world's first garden city. Get it right, and people in Letchworth might stop asking, where are all the flowers? Coming back to the sentiments expressed at the beginning of this presentation about the importance of engagement that we saw in that great image, the available evidence and people and places' own experience points to a need to go about things differently. Here, I reference our case study of the town team's approach taken a little further down the road in Pembrokeshire. Bringing historic premises back into use was an important part of the regeneration approach in many of the Pembrokeshire towns, though as important was the local buy-in achieved through co-production through local town teams. UK government levelling up guidance cites evidence of value of such co-production with communities and recommends that 25% of funding should be passed to grassroots organisations. I'll round off the presentation with a tale from Ireland. This highlights my message about the value of an evidence-based engagement, communication and co-production of ways of boosting pride in place. In 2014, we helped prepare an evidence-based town centre action plan and create a new town team for the town of Ballinasloe in Galway. In 2016, when we went back to resurvey the town and its stakeholders, we found that all indicators relating to pride in place, including business confidence, community perceptions and appeal to visitors, had improved. Stakeholder engagement, imaginative events, window dressing competitions and social media promotion had all helped make people feel better about where they live and work. And this is despite physically the town looking virtually the same. This created an atmosphere of support for major physical advancements of the town centre and its streetscape, along with the accompanying disruption that they went on to achieve. I hope you found this presentation a useful scene setter to make you think about what is pride in place, what it and how it might matter to you, and how to set about boosting it. Don't be afraid to engage with your stakeholders and bring them on the journey with you. At People and Places, we love sharing what works and sometimes what doesn't work. For example, we run a LinkedIn group called Talk of the Town. If you want to keep in touch and find more about some of the evidence and case studies I've referenced today, scan the QR code later, not now, and you'll be able to access that information. We've got guidance due out next week that covers the link between perceptions of pride and place and authentic place branding. I hope you found it a useful scene setter.
Thank you, Chris. Yes, I found it a particularly useful scene setter. I note that we haven't got any specific questions in the chat, but I do have a question myself. I'm very interested in the different the research you've done to look at the different perceptions from different age groups, and when you're undertaking research in a town and then going back to a different town, or when you're doing the word scatter diagrams, do you make a distinction between separate age groups when you're doing that research, or is it just chance the numbers of people that you happen to come across in undertaking that research in the different age groups?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. We've got a lot better at ensuring that our samples are representative of the local demographics and checking that back. We used to send researchers out to street corners and stop people on the street midweek, and we got a very old age profile. And actually, just that anecdote from that surveys that we were completing 5 years ago, where you know, maybe talking to people on market day, is that the older generation, you could put it two ways. They tended to have a higher pride in their place, or equally, sometimes when we're working in places where maybe that pride wasn't justified, they accepted their lot. And I think a younger generation is perhaps more challenging. And current younger generations are kind of more worldly aware of what's happening in their neighbouring town, what's happening in Cardiff, what's happening further afield. So that research, which you saw in that chart that came from the government's own survey, that resonates with us. And of course, you've got to understand the different demographics of your population. So, kind of say if you're working and you've got 2 teenage children, and only one of them is interested in your work, well, that's in line with national statistics.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much. I don't think there's any other questions. Now. Oh, go on. Sorry.
There are some more questions now. Beverly has asked if someone doesn't know where to start with regard to improving pride of place, what should be the very first step?
Well, I think the first step is to ask people. And we do that by asking businesses, by talking to key partners, by surveying users' opinion in town centres to find out what their perceptions of priorities for the town, and to see objectively where things like the historic built environment fit within that. So I gave the example of Tadcaster, particular set of circumstances, but we were overwhelmed by the strength of feeling about the built heritage and the need to make more of it in that town. So that's an extreme example, but it gives you the context to know about, if that's what people are feeling about their place, then that's what you should be seeking to fix, and have the confidence to go back and ask them how that reflects on their sense of pride and place, or their belonging to a town, whichever synonym you want to use.
Great, thank you, Chris. There's one more question which I'm going to ask, because I know Chris can't stay with us to the end of the session today. So I apologise, Ian, who I know is waiting in the wings. But this is a question from Hywel Trywyn from Carnarvon, from the BID organisation. Do you believe that transport links are an intrinsic need for pride in place? Do you think that rail links, he's coming from Carmarthen, to link Carnarvon with Bangor and the broader UK rail network, are essential to pride in place, or not?
Again, it depends on the individual town. I think what people have a strength of feeling about is how accessible getting into their own local town is. And so an important part of our work is looking at perceived barriers on that journey into town. And we always say that journey into town begins when you're sat at home on a Saturday morning thinking, where shall I go? So pride and place is all part of that. But I think pride and place is, as I see it, is a locally felt sentiment. I'm going to write a blog next week, or publish a blog, sorry, about place branding. And I think that perhaps refers to the question in terms of the perception of how visitors may travel between places, and how they may choose to do that journey towards your town.